Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is acclaimed writer Ann Patchett. Welcome to Writing Out Loud, Miss Patchett. Ann.
Miss Patchett, Ann.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to be here, Teresa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Your mother's the novelist, Jean Ray. To writing genes just run in your family?
Yeah. My sister is always very confused why she didn't get any, but I think that sooner or later she'll pull up and write a novel too.
What sort of writing tips do mother-daughter writers share with each other?
My mother started writing when she was 60, and I like to say I made her write. My mother was always writing. She was a nurse, but she wasn't somebody who finished her work, and she wrote mostly for her desk drawer. So at some point she decided she didn't want to be a nurse until she was 95, and she wasn't sure what her income source was going to be, and I said, you need to write a book. So I really pushed her, and by pushing her I was like, let's see chapter 2, where's chapter 6, come on, you've got until Wednesday. I was kind of her personal trainer. I was mean. I slapped her around a little bit. And then long before she was ready to give up the novel, I took it from her and sent it to my agent, sent it to an editor who I had met at a party, and the rest is history. She did really well.
When you first began reading her work, did you make any discoveries about her that surprised you at all?
No, not really, and she probably didn't make any big discoveries about me either. My mother is very big-hearted, she's very funny, and she's very, very sexy. And so...
Great combination.
Yeah, these were the books. They're kind of funny, sexy, empowering books for women in their 60s.
You published your first novel, The Patron Saint of Liars, when you were just 27 years old. With time, have you come to view it any differently?
I've never read it.
You've never read it seriously?
I've never read any of my books.
In retrospect, what do you admire about it?
I have no idea. I
You
don't
really
know what
don't?
it's about.
No.
You know, this is the way it works. You write a book, when I write a book, I read every page that I write about 50 times. I get to the end of the chapter, I read it 50 times. I finish the book, I give it to my friend, they give me editorial advice, I go back, I read it, I send it to my editor, I get copy edits, I have to read page proofs. By the time a book gets to the point where I cannot make any more changes to it, just it's gone to press, I can't make any changes, I never look at it again. So I've never read any of my books. Patron Saint of Liars came out in 1992, which means the last time I read it was 1991. And every now and then I'll be at some event and someone will raise their hand and say, okay, now when Rose leaves Habit, and I'm like, sir, excuse me, time out. When's the last time you read this book? And he'll say, oh, 3 weeks ago. And I said, okay, the last time I read this book was 25 years ago. So I'm sure that whatever you think about it is correct because I don't have a clue what it's about.
Do you read reviews of your work?
I do, which is to say I don't avoid them, but at this point in my life I've read so many reviews, and reviews are boring. Reviews are 90% plot description, and I know what the plot of the book is. And usually they're incorrect plot descriptions. So what happens is a lot of times I'll start reading a review and the phone will ring and I'll put it down and I won't go back to it. I'm not sensitive about reviews. I'm fine to get bad reviews, good reviews, whatever, but they're not really very interesting. I'll tell you what I never read are interviews.
Really?
I never read interviews and I never watch interviews. Never watch myself on television, never listen to myself on the radio, and I will never read an interview that I've given in the newspaper.
Why?
I'm just mortified. I feel like I sound like an idiot.
Well, you come across beautifully. You'll
Thanks.
never watch this, though, so you'll forget
that's
that
right.
you'll forget that I said that. Patron Saint of Liars was compared a lot to the novels of Ann Tyler, and I just wondered what writers you've looked to as mentors over the years. That's a big one.
It's interesting, and I've thought a lot about this in my life. There are writers that I adore and admire and read all the time who had no influence on me whatsoever. I'm a big Henry James fan. Henry James, nowhere in my work. The people that I read when I was young are the people that really influenced me. And the people that I read when I was young were the people that my mother and stepfather were reading, the books that were around the house. I started reading grown-up books when I was probably about 13. And I read John Updike and Saul Bellow and Philip Roth, because those were the three people that my parents read. Those were the contemporary novels that were sitting around in the house. I just reread Humboldt's Gift. Saul Bellow, published in I guess it came out in 76 or something like that. I probably read it in 78. It was amazing to read it again because it was as if it was imprinted on my brain. I would start to read a paragraph and I would be able to close my eyes and tell you everything that was coming up ahead in a way that I would never remember a book that I read 2 weeks ago or the book I finished yesterday on the plane. You know, the way your brain is so soft and impressionable when you're young. So the people who really influenced me were not necessarily the people that I loved the most, but the people that I read when I was the most open to being influenced.
And you studied with some of the great writing teachers.
I did, yeah. I was incredibly lucky. When I was in college, I was an undergraduate at Sarah Lawrence, and I studied a year with Alan Gurganis, Russell Banks, and Grace Paley. They were my three teachers. And they really were like the three fairies who bring the gifts in Sleeping Beauty. You know, this is your lesson. And they had a tremendous influence on me.
What were some of the most important lessons you needed to learn as a writer?
Well, I think the most important lesson was the one that I got from Alan Gurganis, which was to work. That was it. You know, just write so much more than you ever thought possible. Stack up the pages. Don't write a page and make a decision about whether or not it's good or bad. Write 50 pages and then go back later and find out what you've done that's good. Volume, a huge amount of work, which I think, especially when we're young, is so important. It's almost like you have a lot of junk, a lot of bad stories, a lot of sticky black gunk inside you, and you have to just put through a huge volume of writing to clean it out. So that was one great lesson. Grace Paley taught me the lesson of the single voice, which is you really need to be a decent person. She tried to teach us how to have character, how to be better people. She believed that you had to be a good person to be a good writer. So you couldn't be a jerk all day long and then sit down and be a good writer, which obviously many people in history have done that. But she wanted us to be decent people. She wanted us to be politically active, to be good friends, to be good family members, to be good community members, and that our writing should come from that place. And then my third great teacher, Russell Banks, sat me down one day and said, "You're the best writer in the class. No one's ever going to give you any criticism." But he said, "You're slick, you're facile, and you're superficial. And you have to ask yourself if you want to write great literature or if you want to write great television." And I was 20 years old, and it was just like smashing open a piggy bank or something. It was just this moment that I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to write great literature. I wanted to be serious. I wanted to be important. And he said, the only person who can ever make you better is you. You're the only person who can force you to work harder and be better. And you've got to make that decision for yourself. And that just changed my life, that one conversation.
Which brings us to the age-old question, can writing really be taught? And I ask that as a writing teacher.
You know, I believe yes. I can teach someone how to write dialogue. I can teach someone how to write a character. I can teach someone how to put together a plot. I cannot teach someone how to have something to say. I can't teach someone how to be interesting, how to have character, which is what Grace Paley was really trying to teach us. But what do you have in your heart? What do you care about? I can't teach that. Either you're a complex, compassionate, interesting person who thinks deeply about the world. I can teach you how to write better sentences, but I can't teach you how to have a story.
Early on in your career, you seemed to focus on nonfiction. Why so?
I needed money to pay the rent. You know, early on, I always wanted to be a fiction writer. It was absolutely always fiction for me. But I needed a job, so I had taught for a while. I waitressed for a while. I was always looking for the right job to support my fiction, which was what I thought was important and really who I knew I was. So what I wanted to do was write the lowest level of nonfiction possible, so I could do it very quickly without taking up too much space in my brain and then go back to fiction. So I wrote for 17 magazine for 8 years. How to decorate your locker, when your best friend's a guy, when your sister reads your diary. I then wrote for Bridal Guide for a couple of years. I wrote the whole magazine because my old friend from college was the editor, and she said, oh, just write as much as you wanted. So I had 6 different pen names. Sometimes I would write the entire magazine just using different names. And then, you know, I wrote for fashion magazines, I wrote for GQ, and over the years I started doing more intelligent nonfiction. But I really was just interested in kind of meeting my deadline, getting my check, and going back to my novel.
Would you agree with Grace Paley that any story told twice is fiction?
Yeah, sure. And probably most of the stories told once.
Well said. We learn a lot about you and your writing life in your book. This is the story of a happy marriage, an essay collection, and I've asked you to read a passage for us.
Yes, and because I am 51, I will put my glasses on. While I thought I might publish something someday, I was sure that very few people, and maybe no one at all, would read what I wrote. By 9th grade, I was drawing from the Kafka model, obscurity during life with the chance of being discovered after death. Young as I was when I made this commitment, it wasn't quite as morbid as it sounds. So many of the writers we studied in school were unknown in their lifetime, and better still, scorned and dismissed. I naturally assumed this to be the preferable scenario. It was also in keeping with my Catholic education, which stressed the importance of modesty and humility. I did not daydream of royalty checks, movie deals, or foreign rights. Success never figured into my picture. The life I would have would be straight out of La Boheme, having never actually heard of La Boheme. I would be poor, obscure, alone, possibly in Paris. The one thing I always allowed myself was the certainty of future happiness. Even though the history of literature was filled with alcoholics, insane asylums, and shotguns, I could not imagine that I would be miserable if I received the only thing I wanted.
You write so eloquently about your commitment to writing. Have you ever second-guessed that decision?
No. And it's a beautiful thing about my brain. I mean, at this point in my life, I really do think it's all about brain chemistry. But I don't second guess myself. I will wring my hands sometimes for a long time trying to make up my mind. But once I make up my mind, I don't ever look back.
How did you come to write your memoir about friendship, truth, and beauty?
My friend Lucy Greeley died of a heroin overdose when we were both 39. And I wrote an article about her for New York Magazine, and there were several things at play. One was when I wrote the article about her, there was so much more I wanted to say. I felt like I was writing an outline for a longer piece. There were a lot of misconceptions about her, her life, and her death that I really wanted to clear up in a book. And also, I was so sad when she died. And I knew that writing a book would allow me to stay in my sadness longer. Everybody puts a lot of pressure on us to cheer up, get over it. You know, aren't you feeling better? Are you feeling better? You sound better today. And I thought, I'm not better. I'm never going to be better. So that by writing a book, it really was staying in my grief for as long as I needed to. And by the time I finished the book, I really felt better. It was a great gift that I gave to myself.
Was it hard to let the book go?
No. It's not hard for me to let any book go, or really almost anything go, because when it's done, it's done. You know it's done. And I wouldn't want to pick around at it. I took a lot of visual art classes when I was in school and painted, and I always had a very strong sense that things can be ruined. Everybody who studies painting knows that things can be ruined if you work on it too much. But somehow in writing, we don't believe that. We believe that we can always just sort of drop back 4 drafts and everything will be fine again. But I think that there is in writing a certain spontaneity and freshness that you don't want to mess with too much. So you want to revise, you want to get it right, but I don't want to think that it can go on and get better and better the more I work at it. At some point, you go over the top and you start making it worse.
You lost your friend in 2002. What would you like her to know about your life today?
You know, it's one of 2 things. Either there is some sort of an afterlife, in which case she would already know I'm doing fine, or there's not, and she's completely gone, and then there wouldn't be anything to say.
Right.
I mean, I really do carry Lucy with me. You know, I think of her all the time and have very happy memories of her. I mean, when I think about her, there are a lot of things that make me laugh, and she is sort of where my own youth lies. I mean, when I think about Lucy, I think I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't do that much. I couldn't believe that I could save somebody now the way that I believed that I could save her if I just loved her enough and tried hard enough. I don't believe that anymore. But I like that part of myself, that youthful, hopeful, idealistic part of myself that believed that my love and my friendship could save her. And I'm glad that that exists with her. It's probably not an answer to the question. But.
Oh, I think it's a good answer, and it leads us in a new direction. We also want to get back to your fiction and your latest book, State of Wonder. How would you describe this book to people who haven't had a chance to read it yet?
Well, I would describe it as I wanted to write a book about women like myself, like my friends, who are strong and want to do good in the world and aren't constantly falling in love and being manipulated by men. And I feel like I don't see those characters in fiction. I feel like so often the women in fiction are getting jerked around by men, or they're getting their hearts broken, and no matter how smart they are, that sort of love and men, that's all they're thinking about. And I thought, that's just not what I'm thinking about. It's not what my friends are thinking about. So I wanted to write a book about science, and I wanted to write a book about women who were brave and adventuresome and wanted to do good in the world. And that was where the book started out. When other people talk to me about the book, they say, oh, it's a book about everlasting female fertility. And I think, well, that's kind of like the joke of the book. That's the gag line of the book. Because I was trying to come up with a drug that would be so profitable for a drug company that the drug company would let the scientist go AWOL and keep paying for everything because they wanted this drug so desperately. People also say that it is the female heart of darkness, which wasn't at all my intention. I can see why people think that, mainly because it has a river in it. But it wasn't. That wasn't on my radar at all while I was writing the book.
I'd also like your quick take on another couple of your novels. First of all, The Magician's Assistant.
Oh, yes. The Magician's Assistant was a book that I wrote because I was trying to write a book about 2 people who were in a primary and a secondary relationship. So if suddenly you fainted in the middle of the interview and your cameraman, who had never interviewed anyone, suddenly thought, wait a minute, I've been watching her interview people all these years, I could do it. Or likewise, if your cameraman fainted, you could get up and get behind the camera because you would be able to figure it out, even though you didn't think you knew how to do it. So that was the sort of original impetus, that you have a magician and an assistant, and the assistant believes that she doesn't know how to do the magic tricks, she doesn't know how to run her life, she doesn't know how to be in charge, but then the magician suddenly dies, and in the first sentence of the book, Parsifal is dead, that is the end of the story. So I'm not giving anything away. And she goes through a process of discovery that there are all of these things that she knows how to do that she never knew she knew.
Bel Canto.
Belcanto was based on the 1996 takeover of the Japanese embassy in Lima, Peru, by a group called Tupac Amora. And it was a story that I was fascinated with when I was reading about it in the newspaper, because it seemed that this embassy was taken over by a bunch of bumbling teenagers with guns. And there were pieces in the New York Times that said things like, terrorists order more pizza, terrorists demand more soccer balls. And I just kept thinking, what is going on in there? And I started to imagine a situation in which a group of people were taken hostage in an embassy and they didn't speak the same language. And so how do they communicate? Well, first they have one genius translator who is connecting all of them, but then they also have an opera singer. They let all of the women at the party go except the opera singer, because everybody's in love with the opera singer, and she's the most valuable person at the party. And so they have this one woman who can sing, and they begin to communicate through art, which I think that's the power of art, is the great way of communicating.
You've said that the book changed your life.
Well, it changed my life in that it meant that I had a lot of money and I was sort of, semi-famous for a literary author. So it changed my life in that it was my fourth novel, and I had written 3 novels that had done okay, and I was kind of toiling along as a mid-list author, and then I wrote this novel and it was hugely successful. So that was really life-changing. And it was also funny because, I started getting invited to the opera all the time. I mean, I was like, I got invited to better parties all of a sudden after that book was published.
Well, that's a pretty good reward.
Yeah.
You've had such an extraordinary career as a writer. What made you decide to start your own bookstore?
Well, it's easy. They just closed the bookstores in Nashville. I mean, we had a Borders, and of course all the Borders went under, the whole chain went under. And we had a store called Davis Kidd, which used to be our locally owned and operated independent, but it had sold to the Joseph Beth chain out of Ohio. They had moved it into the mall. Both of these stores were 30,000 square feet. They were both profitable every month. They were in business, both the Borders and the Davis Kidd, and they were both closed because the chains were going under. And all of a sudden, there were no bookstores. We had used bookstores, but if you write books for a living, a used bookstore does not do you any good. And so everybody was talking about it. We've got to open a bookstore. Someone's going to open a bookstore. And I kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and it never happened. And finally, I thought, oh my God, I have to do this, don't I? And I did. I was introduced to a woman named Karen Hayes by a mutual friend. She wanted to open a bookstore. We had lunch together, and we decided over the course of one lunch that we would form a 50-50 partnership, and it would be, I would pay for everything and she would do all the work. And that's pretty much the way the store operates. I do a lot of publicity for the store, and I'm very good at bringing authors in and people that I know into the store to do events. But Karen is the person that really is there in the store all the time making it happen.
Has owning a bookstore given you new perspective as a writer?
It has, and on all sorts of funny little things that I never would have imagined. The strangest thing is, I would always go on tour. I do big tours whenever I have a new book out, and I know these people in the bookstores. I've been going to these stores for 20, 25 years, and people say, oh, thank you so much for coming. We are so grateful to you for writing this book. We are so grateful that you came to the store. And I always thought they were being polite, like, oh, it was great to see you too. I had a really good time. Now that I open a store, I realize when Amy Tan comes to my store, when Liz Gilbert comes to my store, when Donna Tartt comes to my store, they are making money for me that night. I mean, the reason why these store owners were so grateful is that what they're saying is, you're writing books that people want to read, and you're coming here and signing them, and we're selling 200, 300 books in a night. That makes an enormous difference for a bookstore. And so I think that I really kind of got out of the hothouse in a way, little orchid that I had been all my life, and started to really understand the business of bookselling. also I find that I can walk into my store and just glance at a cover and know if a book is going to be successful or not.
That's a great instinct to have.
Yeah.
We just have a few seconds left. What's the best novel you still haven't written yet?
Oh, the one I'm writing right now, I'm on page 93. And you know, in the same way that I forget all of my books as soon as I finish them, the one that I'm writing, or the one that I'm about to write, I love so much and I think is so brilliant. The one that I haven't gotten tired of yet. So I'm incredibly happy right now because I'm right in the middle of writing a novel, and that's kind of where I always want to be.
Can you close by giving us the name of it?
I don't know the name of it. It's some variation on the word inheritance, but I don't think I can just call a book Inheritance. But that's what the computer file is called, Inheritance. I never thought I'd write a book called Bel Canto, but that was what the computer file was called, and I just never changed it, so who knows.
So who argues with computers? Thank you so much for being here,
Thank
Anne.
you.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.